actually don't find him to be particularly influential. He's been sitting around 1 million followers forever on X. It's a big amount, don't get me wrong, but it's not growing. He's not building a base. This is like, what is this, 6-7 years? He's had that amount of followers. He's not advanced his influence in any meaningful way. Name the other vice chairs of the DNC, you can't. He's as prominent as they are. Just we know his name because he's easy to pick on. And I do mean that. He's probably 100 pounds soaking wet. So when he goes on TV and doesn't know what he's talking about and looks stupid, it's an easy target for conservatives.
I drag him mercilessly at least once a month. So.
You know, Dean Withers apparently has given up, and he's just now taken to doing podcasts with random people who have no idea what they're talking about.
I saw him with a Charlie Kirk event. There might have been an old video. I just saw it today.
Yeah, that was Jubilee, wasn't it?
So
I don't know. He's trying to get an interview with Charlie, wouldn't talk to him. Oh. I don't know when it was from, though.
So what, he's trying to debate people or talk to people or interview anybody?
The clips that I'm seeing people share, it's no longer, like, he got a big boost when he was like yelling at Charlie Kirk or somebody.
That was the Jubilee thing I saw, yeah.
Yeah. And now it's like the videos that people are sharing of him is him talking to like random people on the street. So he's doing that.
Man on the street stuff?
Yeah, but he's also got podcast clips where he's like in a room doing a podcast talking to someone who's like a random nobody, who's just like, I don't know, I voted for Trump. It's like, why? And it's like, oh, I don't know. And it's like, oh. You know, so I don't think, you know, people really thought that he had something, this Dean Withers guy, and then he kind of just fell off. And I think he's too scared to actually engage in the actual political space.
Like he feels like his position's tenuous at the moment.
No, but I mean, look at Harry Sisson and who's that other guy, Mowry or whatever. These guys, these guys are largely afraid of going into actual political spaces.
I think Dean's different, though.
This is why I think Politicon failed. Do you guys remember Politicon? It's, for those that don't know, it was a political debate convention for the most part. It was panels were had between various individuals of different backgrounds. But it's just going to be conservatives because these younger liberals are terrified to actually engage in these conversations because they end up looking like Luke Beasley did on this show. And now he doesn't want to come back. He doesn't want to do any debates. He won't do it. We've said anybody you want, they don't want to do it. We do have success with smaller, less well-known liberals because they don't have anything to lose.
It's hard to be influential in that space because they can't really think for themselves. They have to follow a very specific script. If they go out of line, then, you know, the cult comes for them and they're like, nope, you can't say that. You can't do that. You know, I think on a previous show, Tim, you talked about like abortion, for instance. You could be the biggest communist in the world, but then you're like, maybe there should be a limit on abortion. It's like, nope, you're out.
Yeah, you could. Jimmy Dore, he's the example we use all the time. I mean, dude's a socialist economically, and he's called right wing. Like the left calls him a right winger. It makes no sense.
As soon as you start to explore reality, I mean, almost any of these conspiracy theories, not any by any means, but like 9/11 for me, the war in Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. You start to go down that, it's just this whole liberal economic sham becomes apparent. You start to see the lines and the outlines of it all, and you're like, what, how can I live a lie? I cannot live a lie.
So this is the issue with these liberal personalities and why they don't do shows, because if you were to sit down in a chair where everybody has a computer pulled up and a monitor where we display, I mean, I got a monitor in front of me, there's a monitor behind Ian, and a gigantic TV on the wall showing this story that you are seeing on the screen now. So when I think one of the big moments on this show was when Hunter Avallone came on, and I said, well, look, you know, Joe Biden said, if you don't fire the prosecutor, you're not getting the $1 billion. And he smugly went, that never happened. And this kid actually thought that was, so he was lied to. The liberals were saying that never happened, so he genuinely believed it. And then I went, okay, and I pulled the video up and literally 30 seconds and pressed play and said, yeah, you were wrong about that, now what? And it's humiliating.
He doesn't have any talking points. He had to be wrong about that because it just simply didn't happen. So there's no script.
So what happens when you're like 20 years old, you build up a big following based on liberal talking points, and then when you start actually building out your business, you start to realize you're wrong about a lot of things. And then you realize I can't actually go on any of those conservative shows because how do you lie about something that is basically true? Like Abrego Garcia, Maryland man. So what happens when you go on that show and say, okay, you're calling him a Maryland resident, a Maryland man. He's from El Salvador. He's accused of beating his wife. And then they're like, now they're all backing away. You see the Democrats being like, oh, it's not about him. When the Democrats first got on board with that, it very much was about the Maryland father who was wrongly deported. Hassan Piker, do you know this? He did not know the guy was from El Salvador. He thought he was from Maryland.
If they were just honest and said, look, the guy may not be a great guy, but we're worried about due process. If they'd have just gone with that line, right, it would have been at least tolerable, and the right wouldn't have been able to mock the Democrats so mercilessly. They wouldn't have had so much egg on their face.
Here's why people like Dean Withers would rather do a man on the street than actually come on this show, because he was booked, and then he canceled and said he would reschedule and never did. Because what he's doing now is he walks with a random person and says, what was Donald Trump was convicted on 34 felonies. Why? And then the regular person's like, I don't know. I heard that. I think it's probably not true. It's like, what's not true about it? And they're like, I don't know. It just seems like they're weaponizing against him. And he goes, how? And it's like, okay, Dean, come on this show. And from memory, I will break down the entirety of that case for you. That's why liberals avoid shows like this. Mm-hmm. And that's why, even though my politics may be like moderate, liberal leaning in some areas, they call me right wing. It's why Jimmy Dore, a socialist, is called right wing. And that's why when Hassan humiliated himself when he played the clip of my White House press briefing question, and he was like, what do you mean, bro? Like, you actually saying he's not from Maryland? Like he's from D.C.? And then he's like, centrist liberal Tim Pool. Yeah. It's like, my dude. Hassan genuinely believed the guy was from Maryland. He didn't know the guy was from El Salvador. And then because of that, he thought Tim Pool's not a centrist liberal. When all I did was say, here is a thing that is true, like fact-based, that the media is lying about. Hassan chose to believe the media and made the assumption I was lying about what the media was reporting. He trusts the media when I was calling out the lies from the media.
I had my red pilling reality shattering happen in 2007 before I had any kind of following. I had like 4,000 followers on YouTube. It was big at the time, but it was humiliating, and I had to learn in real time in public. And because of that humility, I feel much stronger in my beliefs now. But for someone to have 66 million, 600,000 followers, that amount of humiliation to realize that not everything, but things you've been saying for decade, 5 years is wrong, is like, how you going to eat that one, bro? And Tim, I want to ask you, what was your red pilling like? Like, how did you start to see past the narrative?
I never had a red pilling.
Did you always, since 9/11? Like, how far back did you like?
Well, I mean, actually, I'll put it this way. I did not have a moment most would describe as like a red pilling moment where they were like, I'm a Democrat. Then like Brendan Strzok describes how he felt physical pain, realized he was wrong. But I've had many formative moments. So the story I often tell is that, I grew up Catholic, family basically walked away from the church. I became an angsty teenage atheist, punk rock, all that stuff. And then when I was 18, I was hanging out with this guy, went to his house to like chill and jam. And he was like a prominent skateboarder. So this is super cool. It's like I was going to hang out with the cool kids. And he had a picture of Jesus on his wall. And then I was like, what are you, like a Christian or something? He's like, nah. And I was like, then why do you have Jesus on your wall? And he said, I just thought a story about a guy go around helping people was kind of cool. And then I was like, that was a formative moment for me. That maybe you could describe as a red pill moment where I realized all the things, that's probably it. That's probably a way to describe it. That all of these angsty, atheist, liberal, urban narratives didn't actually encompass what someone who actually liked Jesus thought. So here's a guy who wasn't a Christian, didn't go to church, didn't think anything other than, I don't know, there's a story about a guy who like helped people. And then I started to think about it for a second and I was like, yeah, that's actually kind of okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And that was probably the moment. I was 18. That was probably the moment where I was like, yeah, all that stuff they're pushing forward about what it means to be Christian. Because I was very much like on the watching Real Time with Bill Maher and all that stuff.
And then you just
urban liberal.
That then kind of like shattered your, or that then allowed you to start to see that Borgish mentality elsewhere.
So I will say this: I have known of Alex Jones for a very long time since I was a teenager. Because I was on the internet my whole life since I was a little kid. So, like, I had friends that were talking about Info or Prison Planet, I think was the website. And then, of course, there was Loose Change and Loose Change 9/11. I think I was like, I don't know how old I was, 16 or 17, when the 9/11 truth stuff was getting popular online. So I had seen Alex Jones stuff all the time. So I had a general understanding that the media was full of it and lying all the time. And but that's why I say that I don't have like a traditional red pill moment. But I do think that moment I described where I realized that this urban liberal angsty atheist narrative was not really conveying what Christians actually believed. There's another moment where I was hanging out with this chick in the suburbs when I was like 17. So this is even before that. And they were Christian, Catholic, pro-life. And we were having dinner. Like, they invited me to the house to hang out, and they cooked dinner. And then they explained that they were pro-life. And I asked them what that meant, and they told me. And I was like, oh. And then I was like, that kind of exposure, I think, probably insulated me from the more Trump derangement syndrome mentality, you know? Like, I already knew some of these people. I knew they weren't Hitler for believing the things they believed.
I got to ask you the same question, Josie. What was your path towards breaking the psychological mold?
Ron Paul. So I grew up in Massachusetts, and I never really fit in Massachusetts. I tried to fit in different ways. In high school, I joined the Gay Straight Alliance, you know, just so I could kind of feel out different people in different groups, and nothing really worked. I'm not gay, by the way. I'm straight, but still, so then 9/11 happens, and I'm in high school, and a lot of people around me were all of a sudden really like, we're going to go to war. We're going to get this. We're gonna go to war, and this is good. And I remember thinking in my heart, this isn't good. This isn't good. I don't. Something doesn't work right. I don't know. This doesn't feel right to me. It didn't feel right to be pro-war. It didn't feel right to be an activist. Nothing felt right. And then it was 2012 when I found Ron Paul, and I was like, this feels right. And so I don't know if it was really a red pill moment. It was just a moment where every view that I had, the way that I am, who I was my whole life just made sense because I found my people. I found my tribe.
Were you political from 2001 to 2010?
No, I wasn't. I sort of started dipping my feet into it in 2012, but I didn't start the Redheaded Libertarian until December 2017. So there was a period of time where I was still politically homeless because there wasn't a Ron Paul that I could really attach to. So I found Rand Paul, and I'm like, okay, I like him, you know, like is Filibuster the Patriot Act. I think that was 2014. And so I was like, I like this guy, and I was following this guy now, you know? So it really came to the point where Trump got elected, and I'm living in Massachusetts still, and everybody is insane. Everybody lost their minds. And I'm like, why is everybody crazy about this? This is like, I just couldn't understand it. And so I had a friend who was like, well, you should maybe go on Twitter at the time. He's like, you know, you'll find people to talk to. You'll find people, like-minded people. And so I'm like, okay. So I just wanted to get on Twitter and make like a couple of friends that I could talk to. And I accidentally made a lot of friends.
Like doused your mind with a new form of consciousness.
Accidentally made a lot of friends.
Yeah, I had no intention of this ever happening.
I don't know. The libertarians kind of went nuts, though.
Yeah.
I've gone nuts.
Yeah,
It's a good domestic policy, but it doesn't work geopolitically.
This is why I'm really aligning myself with the founders, and because it's something I was always interested in, always loved. It was the Constitution. I understood it, and I could explain it. And I know a lot of people were never taught about it, and they weren't taught revolutionary history. They weren't taught accurate anything. So it's something I'm like, all right, well, our founders were kind of the original, especially the anti-federalists. They were like the original states' rights libertarians, you know. So I really lean into that, and the Federalists were more like Reagan Republicans, I guess, if I had to compare them to somebody. Not really that far, but there's really no good way to put it. Like Sam Adams was definitely a states' rights guy, but James Madison was more a little bit more federal, you know. So there's a little differential, but that's why I lean into that as opposed to the crazy libertarian idea, like, oh, should there be an age of consent? You know, like the kind of libertarians that I want nothing to do with, I stay away from, and judge me by my enemies.
Yeah.
Well, we got a long show, but Phil, if you want to answer that same question, I've never really asked you about your road to perdition. Like, how did you snap out of it? Were you even ever in it? Because I remember you telling me you were like a Republican early, but what happened?
I mean, I'm coming from the music industry. I was kind of always a contrarian, and being like, I would argue on like lambgoat.com. Well, I would argue politics on lambgoat.com. But I guess when I kind of was like, you know, when I fully decided that the whole narrative that was coming out of the government was something not to be trusted was because of Ron Paul and the Iraq War. In 2008, I was a Ron Paul guy. And you know, same thing in 2012. I was a Ron Paul guy too. So it was definitely the whole Ron Paul revolution and stuff that kind of brought me out of it. Because
you know what I think was a big deal for a lot of people that led to the Ron Paul stuff was Loose Change 9/11, second edition.
What was the difference in the edition?
The first edition didn't really catch on and go viral. The second edition with minor updates was like, not that I agree or believe it's all true, but it was entertainment. And everybody I knew was burning it to DVDs and sharing with each other.
Zeitgeist was a big one.
Zeitgeist.
It still is amazing. Watch that movie if you haven't seen it.
Yes.
Yeah. And so those two films went viral on burned CDs. Like, people were so compelled by these that they would burn CDs with them and share them, or DVDs. And I remember when I worked at O'Hare, someone brought it in and they were like, have you guys seen this Loose Change thing? We're going to play it. And then they played it in the break room. And like, I'd seen it online. But that spreading around, I think, helped create the Ron Paul revolution.
Yeah, he started talking about blowback. When I heard him say the word blowback on the presidential state where he was running for president, he started talking about it in front of Obama and Hillary, or no, whoever he was running against at the time.
The Republicans.
Yeah, that was...
He was in the primary.
It was like I knew it. I knew what he was saying was true, and I'd already kind of believed that was the case, but to hear it was like, it was terrifying. I was terrified of Ron Paul. He struck me as like Darth Vader about to bring balance to the Force, and I was like terrified of what that meant. But it was like he was just explaining the inevitable, and we're living in it now.
Do you think David Hogg, Maury, or Sisson knows what it means to burn a CD?
Probably not.
Maybe get a match.
Pretty sure
couple
no,
matches.
because
I don't know.
By the time they were even old enough to
do you mean,
comprehend the
matches?
function of burning, DVDs had already taken over.
Yeah. I imagine the response would be something along the lines of Hillary's, what do you mean, like with a cloth? Like, what do you mean, like with matches?
You know what was fun? Turning on the radio, and then they announced that, like, up next, we're going to play, like, Plush. And then you'd be like, oh, you'd have to put the cassette tape in and hit record.
I would sit by it waiting, and you get if you miss, you get the end of the song before. So a lot of songs I still think of the song before. Put in them.
And then you'd have like your mixtape you made from all the different radio stations to record on the cassette.
Yeah. Jack Posobiec, he calls us centennials. That's what he calls kind of
Centennials?
the older millennials. He calls us centennials. So it's people who understand, because this is a micro generation that many of us are in, and it essentially is, we had to go from analog to digital. And we had to learn both in middle school and high school.
Yeah.
So this puts us kind of in a we have advantages in some ways. Like, look at me, I still take paper notes, instead of doing whatever on my computer. So it just it gives us an advantage, but it also puts us in just a weird little group. It's like a 7-year group of centennials.
That's really interesting to think of generations, because time is motion, and the speeding up of information transfer is like speeding up time.
Yeah.
And AI, like the kids that are born with this tech are almost a different generation. Whatever that word even means.
But it is.
Generation.
Well, so the technological advancements shape generations massively. And but you make a good point about the speeding up the transfer of information is condensing time. Think about what it was like in 1776. Think about when they declared independence.
Took 6 weeks to get to England.
And then, even when it got to England, it didn't necessarily mean that Parliament and the Crown had a chance to thoroughly review it. And then the king reads it and he's like...
He laughed at it.
Yeah, and then it's got to go... There's probably, how many weeks of review from the British government, and then how long until the response came back? 6 weeks is actually pretty quick, to be honest.
Yeah. It got there pretty fast. It came back, and the first thing... They were already redcoat stationed, so the reason why we had the Boston Tea Party and why we had the Boston Massacre was because Massachusetts was militarized. What had happened is they had passed the
Intolerable acts.
First they'd passed the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and the Townshend Acts. And before they passed the Townshend Acts, they're like, all right, people are rioting. We don't want that to happen again. So we're going to send a military over there to keep things in order. And so by the time that the Townshend Acts were passed, and this was 1767, the Townshend Acts were passed, and there was 2,000 redcoats stationed in Boston. And so that's why they were rioting. That's why everybody was so mad. And then what had happened is they were just having one of their normal riots out for the Boston Massacre. They were having one of their normal riots out in front of a store of a loyalist. And the guy that was guarding the store, the informant, he got all rattled and he ended up shooting into the crowd, and he shot a little boy. This was February 22nd of 1770. Shot a little boy. The little boy dies. His name was Christopher Snyder. So after that, there were riots every day, riots, building and building. And then March 5th was the Boston Massacre, and that was just another riot that they were out there. And it just, the redcoats got nervous and they shot into the crowd again. And that's what happened.
What I learned about the whole lead up to the Revolutionary War is that it was like 1750, and the British were basically like not governing the colonies at all. The colonies were on their own for the 100 years that they'd been around or whatever. And then the British were like, okay, if we don't take these guys seriously, we're going to lose that territory to the French, because they were French were militarized up north,
Yep.
Spanish were militarized down south. British were like, we need to go put troops in the Americas. So they sent all these British troops. And the colonists like, what the fuck? Get out of my country. We've been doing this for 100 years, bro. Get out. But the British are like, no, we need to protect our land. And then they decided, in order to pay the troops, they started taxing the colonists because
Yes.
they couldn't afford.
And taking their homes.
And that was, so this taxing to make the colonists pay for their own subjection. And it was just too much culture shock in 20 years.
The first major tax was 1734, I believe, and it was the molasses tax. And so when they brought down the sugar tax, this next one, they're like, okay, well, we're going to cut the molasses tax. But then they started taxing everything. And they were taxing right down to a piece of paper was taxed. If you were using a piece of paper, we're taxing you by the piece of paper. So this was very tyrannical, what they were doing there and what the colonists were living through. And
It was like inevitable. It seems like nothing the British could have done could have kept the colonies.
And what Tim had brought up with the intolerable acts, what those were, is the punishment for the Boston Tea Party, which was just it was. We were a powder keg at this point. It was just waiting to go off after the Boston Massacre. It was a little bit quiet for a couple years, but it was just building this patriotism.
Now, isn't that crazy, though? Years. The Revolutionary period was what, about 20 some odd years?
The Revolutionary period, yeah. I mean, if you want to start at the sugar, that was 1763, and it didn't end until the Bill of Rights in 1791.
And
Revolutions are long.
the Declaration of Independence wasn't written, signed, and declared until 13 months after the war already started.
Yeah. Yep.
People-
Because that was 1775.
People think that the Founding Fathers got together and were like, let's declare independence. And then they did. And then the Crown was like, I declare war on you for doing this. No, actually, war was declared on the colonists first. And they largely did not organize much for about a year. So it was, or I should clarify, because that's a subjective view of it. But they did not declare a formalized country until a year later, 13 months. And what was it? It was July 2nd?
July 2nd, and then they reviewed everything on July 3rd and then July 4th day. And they didn't even sign the declaration until I think August 8th. Like they actually sign it, but we still celebrate on the 4th. But the intolerable acts were laid down after the Boston Tea Party, and these what King George did, and many of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence are about the intolerable acts.
Yeah.
And what King George did, he wiped out their government essentially, and he put his own people in as the governor. He put his own people in at judge, jurist. Like it was not fair anymore. He closed down Boston Harbor and said you can't open this until you repay the East India Company every penny. And I mean, the Boston Tea Party was because of the fascism between the East India Company and King George. They were in bed together. They weren't paying any taxes. They were getting fully reimbursed on all their product. And they were really undermining the entrepreneurs, John Hancock and Sam Adams. So that was a big...
So here's a funny little bit of trivia. John Adams wrote, "The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it'll be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade and shoes, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore."
July 4th?
July 2nd.
July
July
2nd.
2nd?
Yeah.
And that's because why?
That's when they signed the Declaration of Independence.
Oh.
Yeah.
But then why do they say July 4th is Independence Day?
That's when people knew it happened.
Oh.
Yep.
That it was officially in record. Like, we do a lot of things and then it gets submitted to courts and then it gets like officially. So there are, I'll say this without getting into specifics on lawsuits. I've been involved in lawsuits and my lawyer will be like, the lawsuit is filed. They have notice. Don't say anything until the court publishes it. And then like 3 days later, the court publishes it and then the press gets it.
So should we celebrate July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th?
I think we're doing.
I think we should celebrate July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th.
Yeah, MAGA month.
Mega Month. It is the whole month that we celebrate.
Well, just to tap off the convo
Self-determination.
about time dilation and how, the speeding up of data transfer is like, squishing these generations together. I don't know if there's even any way to tie it back into what we're talking about, that it takes 2 days for people to know that something got signed. Right now, it takes 2 seconds. It's a very different world. A revolution can happen very quickly relative to what it used to do.
Technically, like I just described, you can submit official documents to a court and they don't publish it in the public record for 3 days or longer.
And just because the information is available doesn't mean the information is spread particularly
Ian,
fast.
did you know that retirements in the government are handled by going down into a limestone cavern?
Yeah. We got to talk.
The speed of technology and the speed of government are two very different things.
Yeah. Yeah. They were telling me that there's no parking down there. Certain Homeland Security, it's like there's no parking. I'm like, this is the American government and there's no parking spaces. I was like, yeah. But we have super secret underground science bases.
Mount Weather and Raven Rock.
Like they know where to put money, but it's definitely not at like parking spaces, I guess.
They're down the street from us.
Who is?
Raven Rock and Mount Weather.
What is it?
Bro, are you kidding?
I don't know Raven Rock.
You've never played Fallout 3?
I have played Fallout 3, yeah.
Did you beat Fallout 3?
No.
Oh, okay.
I do all the side quests, so I get
because that's where the
sidetracked.
Enclave is in Raven Rock.
Okay.
It's the emergency bunker for government officials.
Oh.
Yeah.
Where is it relative to DC?
West. Well, northwest. So, like, it's close to where we are.
Yeah, dude.
You can look it up on the map. Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.